Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Soul Forum, the Soul Foundation's digital meeting in which we have serious discussion about the science, policy, philosophy, and culture surrounding unidentified anomalous phenomena, or UAP, formerly known as UFOs. I'm Peter Skafish, cultural anthropologist and co-founder of the Soul Foundation. And I'm very pleased to have two very distinguished guests today. The first, who I believe is very well known to our audience, is Congresswoman Anna Paulina Luna, who represents Florida's 13th Congressional District, which is on the west side of Tampa Bay. And she's also a veteran of the U.S. Air Force. Now, since arriving in Congress, she's emerged as one of the leading voices about the seriousness of the UAP issue, but also about the reality of government UAP secrecy. She serves not only on the House's Committee on Foreign Affairs, but also on the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee, where she chairs its declassification task force. Now, as many people know who are watching this, the task force is focused on the declassification of crucial federal records, including those related to the JFK assassination. Now, they're also focused on UAP disclosure and have held two key hearings on the subject, with a third to come. Now, she's joined, and this is a really great meeting of the minds, by Dr. Avi Loeb, who, as everyone here knows, is the head of the Galileo Project. He's also the founding director of Harvard University's Black Hole Initiative. He's the director of the Institute for Theory and Computation at the Harvard-Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics, and he's the former chair of Harvard University's Astronomy Department. Among his other achievements, he is the author of Extraterrestrial: The First Sign of Intelligent Life Beyond Earth, the textbook Life in the Cosmos, as well most recently is a book titled Interstellar. Now, he's also a friend and member of the advisory board of the Soul Foundation, and so we're especially happy to welcome him. Now, to jump into what we're doing today, because the Congresswoman doesn't have a lot of time, Dr. Loeb recently made some very public proposals to investigate the third known interstellar object, which is 3I Atlas. And the Congresswoman has supported this with a letter to NASA. And so, that's something we're going to discuss here, because this is a crucial instance of congressional support for the science of UAP and possible interstellar objects. But before we get into that, we want to really start with a discussion of what's coming up next week, which is the third hearing on the House Oversight Committee on UAP. This could be a very crucial hearing. The first one was quite historic. We think the second one brought forward a lot of crucial information. And as you know, Congresswoman, you've been the driver of those things. And so we want to hear from you what you hope to achieve with this hearing, and also what you hope this will do for legislation and further action in Congress.
Yeah, so if we're going back to the way beginning, myself, Representative Burchett, and Representative Burleson were really the three members of Congress that started saying we need to ask questions. And frankly, when we first started bringing this up as a discussion and presented it to oversight, a lot of people said, you can't do this. These people are kooks. You're going to basically ruin your political career. And I don't believe that that's the case. I think that there's many very smart, talented people, and to include former, government officials, et cetera, that have all had, questions on this, have either been stonewalled or told to look elsewhere. And essentially on a number of issues, not just from a national security perspective, but also from a budgetary perspective. If you have programs, if you have departments that are operating outside the purview of Congress, and yet we're writing the checks, there's no oversight. And so there is a situation that arises when you have basically these agencies operating in the dark and then denying access to members. And that's something that's happened not just to myself, but also to two other members of Congress. And so the whole goal and objective of these hearings were bring forward the witnesses, stop gaslighting them. Let's bring some legitimacy to this, because these are people, these have been in some instances, military members, pilots, former government employees, but they're not lying. They're not making this up. And what's been really, really interesting to see in all this, because this hearing specifically, even though there's been previous hearings, this is one of the few that we've been able to actually have as the new task force. And I bring that up because, we are bringing forward, and we've been, shown information. And I can tell you that without a doubt, I do believe that UAPs are real. And I don't think these people are lying. But, you're also seeing this massive disinformation campaign of people that, we've never even met or had contact with that try to discredit this. And the question is, why do they try to discredit it? And if you look at their historical record, they were put in positions of power, and then they were actually known to witness, intimidate, hide information from Congress, et cetera. And so I'm not the type of person that's just going to let someone lie. I'll call it out where I see it. But it's not necessarily about me. It's a bigger thing. And the fact is that we are being denied access to some of this information. And I will continue to also say, and I know this is kind of a long-winded response, but, as a member of Congress, especially being a member of oversight, even if there are special access programs, which, as you know, the intelligence community likes to hide things buried within these onions, and there's layers of programs, et cetera. Ultimately, at the end of the day, this task force was set up to be able to access that information. If we find nothing, we'll tell you we found nothing. But when you're constantly being denied information, and or you finally get to the bottom of certain things and you're realizing, wow, there's definitely something here, they're not sharing it with the American people, we're going to continue to push for that transparency. So I know both Representative Burleson and Burchett have been great at the legislation putting forward to help present that transparency. I'm fully backing it. I'm signing on as co-sponsors to that legislation, but it doesn't come without a cost. As some of you may know, even Representative Burchett last cycle tried to bring forth some legislation that would help the FAA reporting procedures with UAPs, and the intelligence community killed that. And then ultimately, he drew a primary challenger in his congressional race that was backed by some of the members of House Intelligence because of that. So it's definitely an internal fight here in Washington, but I will tell you, don't listen to the naysayers, because they're the ones that are not in the weeds on this.
Okay. I mean, and that is not long-winded. This is world-changing stuff, as you know. And
Yeah.
so we really want to hear from you on this.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you've covered a lot of ground, I think, in the last 2 years. I mean, you came into Congress early 2023, and you were almost immediately thrust into the issue, but you also embraced it and took it up. And, your committee has received testimony, sworn testimony, from people who had enviable careers in the intelligence community,
Mm-hmm.
about long decades of UAP secrecy, allegations about recovered technology, even allegations about biological materials recovered with vehicles. I mean, really wild stuff. So could you speak to what you think the most credible testimony has been, even if it's about some of this weird stuff, but also about other things that I think people they know less about what you guys have heard. I mean, you said recently in public that you were exposed in a classified environment to some pretty compelling photographic and visual evidence.
Yeah, what I can tell you is so far, I think the best hearing that we had was that first hearing. And so far, David Grush has been someone that I've actually, and it's really bizarre to see the attacks that come into some of our witnesses, especially after we announce them. But so far, he's been able to not just help point us in the right direction as far as being able to turn over the correct rocks, and then also flush out who both the good and bad actors are. But, I was also in the military, and when I'm interacting with him, I do not get any sense that he is full of nonsense. I think that he takes this very seriously. And then when you realize that a lot of these witnesses, look, we had tried to get another hearing with the task force before this one, and every single witness we had reached out to said that they didn't want to testify because they were scared for their life. And these were not people that you see in the media. These were not, podcasters or anyone who's made a career talking about it. These were legitimate, former military and or military contractors, and they were literally afraid of being killed. And then you had David Grush tell us directly that he was actually felt in fear of his life, and some weird things had happened prior to that first hearing. And then I would encourage all of you to actually reach out to him, because even just yesterday I actually went into the skiff with David Grush and Eric Burleson, and prior to that skiff meeting happening, there was something really bizarre that took place with David Grush, and it's being handled at the law enforcement level. But, things like that happening, are not normal, especially being that David Grush is currently Eric Burleson's congressional staffer. And so you're seeing a lot of stuff now flush out. And what I can tell you is we are trying to actively push to release the information that we've seen to the American people. And so again, you have this aspect of this disinformation campaign that's taking place, trying to discredit it. And I frankly don't care at this point, because what I can tell you is the people that are genuinely interested in the actual science of this, the people like Dr. Avi Loeb, who actually can provide the data to back this stuff up, those people know the truth. And so we're not necessarily doing this for the people on X that are trying to discredit it. We're doing for the people that are actually taking this seriously. And then also to remember, this is a very, very big deal, especially from a national security perspective. And so I've actually also had meetings with officials of foreign governments. I won't get into what those governments are, but I did ask for any information that they could share in regards to this topic. And I bring that up because the US government is not the only government that has taken a particular interest in this. And there are going to be, I think there's going to be some information presented in the upcoming hearing from George Knapp on the topic. But again, we've been able to branch out and talk to other governments in regards to this. So ultimately, I was happy to support Dr. Avi Loeb's efforts, specifically on what he's doing. And I think a lot of people saw that letter, Avi, and they were just like, well, that's interesting.
Well, okay, good segue. Let's move to that. And Avi, look, you've been a trailblazer in science on this and related issues, and your most recent work on this interstellar object is not yet well known even to people who follow this and related science. So maybe you could just say a word about the significance of this and why I think you've got data on this, which is even more compelling than you did on Oumuamua.
Well, first, I wanted to salute Congresswoman Luna for her vision and her courage in addressing this subject. And I think we have a lot of things in common. We both started in the military. We both did not lose our childhood curiosity. When there is something anomalous, we want to figure it out and not listen to stories of people who pretend to be the adults in the room. Now, of course, this subject has connotations in the context of national security. And of course, that needs to be attended to. But if it has any scientific merit, we better figure it out. And most recently, on July 1st, there was the third interstellar object that was discovered and appeared to be very unusual, very anomalous in terms of its size and trajectory. The size, based on its brightness, if it's just a solid surface reflecting sunlight, the size was inferred to be between 20 and 46 kilometers. That's a huge object. And there is not enough rocky material in interstellar space to deliver such a rock to the vicinity of Earth over a period of a decade. You would expect it to come once per several tens of thousands of years. And it's 1 million times more massive than the previous interstellar objects, Oumuamua and Borisov. I had actually a very brief question that I wanted to ask Representative Luna. One of the interesting facts about the anomalous interstellar objects, Oumuamua and Atlas, is that they were red. Do you think that superhuman intelligence is more likely to believe in the principles of the Republican Party?
No, I think when we're talking about the potential of life on other planets and in other galaxies, I don't think that there's necessarily a political loyalty there. So,
right. But at any event, so this object, 3I Atlas, aside from the fact that it was so big, and that implies perhaps that it's targeting the inner solar system, has nothing to do with rocks in interstellar space. It actually moved on a trajectory that is perfectly aligned with the planets around the sun, and the likelihood of that happening at random is 1 in 500. So that's very peculiar, and it attracted my attention. And more recently, there was a plume of gas that was detected around it by several observatories, the Webb telescope in particular, and also the SPHEREX Space Observatory. And they found that the composition of that plume is very different than typical comets. It's mostly carbon dioxide, 95% by mass, and only 5% water. And the very large telescope detected nickel, but no iron. And we usually separate nickel and iron in making nickel alloys industrially. Nature doesn't do that. Nickel and iron appear together. They are produced in exploding stars with comparable quantities. And in all comets in the past, we saw nickel and iron together. And here we find only nickel with an upper limit on iron. That's another anomaly. And I simply argue that, in science, we decide the nature of an object based on data, based on evidence. So let's collect as much data as possible. That's my point, because this object appears anomalous. And just like Congresswoman Luna, witnesses some resistance in the political circles, I find the resistance within academia to an agnostic study of such anomalies. Because the so-called comet experts, they insist they know the answer in advance. And even when there are anomalies, in the case of Oumuamua, the argument was maybe it's a dark comet where you can't see the cometary tail. It's just like looking at an elephant and saying the elephant is a zebra without stripes. The stripes are used to label a zebra, to find that the animal you're looking at is a zebra. So how can they say that it must be a comet, but you don't see the cometary tail? That's an oxymoron. And moreover, there is a lot of resistance to discussing the possibility of us finding objects like the ones that we produced. We produced a lot of space objects, and on January 2nd, there was an asteroid that was declared by the Minor Planet Center to be a near-Earth rock. And then within a day, they realized that one moves along the trajectory of the car, the Tesla Roadster car that was launched by SpaceX in 2018. And then they said, oh, no, we take it out of the catalog. The only reason they were able to do that is because we knew that humanity launched this particular object. Otherwise, they would declare it as a rock. And so we have to be careful about experts declaring things as rocks in the sky, because we produce some space objects. And the question is whether other civilizations did as well. And of course, the UAP subject is a derivative of that, because if we are visited by a technological object like 3i Atlas, it could either visit us or release some mini probes that arrive at Earth and appear as UAP. And we need to be aware of that possibility.
Well, thank you, Avi, for bringing that back to what's going on in Congress and the UAP topic, because we only have the Congresswoman for, I think, 10 or 15 minutes more. I want to go back to her and then come back to you after that, Avi. And I want to ask you, Congresswoman Luna, what do you think Congress's role should be on the UAP issue? Something that doesn't get discussed enough in the discussion of the politics of UAP is that the legislative branch, and we could also say the judiciary as well, have been completely cut out of governance on the issue. Congress passes laws, not the executive branch. And for probably 80 years, Congress didn't even know this was something on which it would need to govern. So what do you see as needing to take place?
Well, first and foremost, what we're finding, again, going back to the issues that we've had with whistleblowers and people wanting to come forward, but then fearing retribution and or not wanting to give Congress information because they fear that they're going to be prosecuted for breaching security clearances, which actually in itself is also bizarre, because then you're realizing, well, how could Congress then truly provide oversight if they can't even get the information? And yet you have civilians that have the information. And so I think whistleblower protections are very big. And so we're working on that legislation, but then also to, the UAP Disclosure Act, there's a bicameral and bipartisan level of support for this. And you'll even have conversations on the floor that take place with other members that say, look, I'd like to address this, but, they are afraid. And part of the reason why I think, I was the one that was, I guess, ultimately to step up to take the mantle is because ultimately there is a fear associated with this topic. And I don't think that is there for, for no reason, right? We've had people in the past that when they talk about this, then weird things end up happening. And so ultimately for us, there needs to be an aspect of transparency. And then going back to the whole aspect of, well, the executive branch having the classification authorities, and then these agencies will house then within, whether it's the DOE, the DOD, any intelligence agency, they'll then have their own classification way of doing things. And so ultimately what we're having to do as a result of this task force is we're actually going to be going to basically the president to ask if we can get the access to programs that may exist within these different agencies. And that's because even here, you know, people are trying to say, well, you have to go to this department or this department. So there is this overclassification, but it almost feels as if they're passing the buck and not actually wanting to give us information and give us access to these various programs. And so for us specifically, again, it is multifaceted, and we're doing this in addition to everything else taking place on the Hill, which I'm sure you can imagine one day is like a dog year. And so there's a lot going on, but we do think that it's a service that we owe the American people again. And then we are also trying to, at the same time, advocating for the release of at least the stuff that we've seen so the American people can make the decision for themselves.
Yeah, I have to say that it's been remarkable to me to watch you and Eric Burleson do as much as you're doing on this, and also to be as educated as you are on the topic. I'm an academic, so I can spend all my time on this, but I've seen both of you have show a remarkable level of understanding of this and the history of it in recent interviews. And I think people in the public know that's a very difficult thing to do when you have to manage all the responsibilities of being in Congress. Now, you just said something that I want to follow up on because I think it's very significant, and it's something that a lot of people would have missed, is you just said that you and your committee members will attempt to approach the president to get access to the program or programs in which UAP affairs are housed. Now, I'd like to ask you a question about that. From most of the contacts I have who are retired from the intelligence community that either worked on this stuff or were adjacent to it, their testimony suggests that the program or programs that deal with this are somehow legally under direct presidential control. Have you heard that testimony?
I haven't heard that testimony, but I have heard, just based on my own, hunt to try to get these clearances. Because remember, as members of Congress, we should be given access to everything, right? We have the highest need to know on anything. But being able to get access to the programs is a little bit different. And so, specifically with the DOD, the Department of Energy, and ODNI, you still have the heads of these various agencies and then the agencies themselves that set the classification. But the overarching boss of that is the executive branch, thus the President of the United States. And so because of the fact that we have, and it feels like we've been blockaded on many efforts, we are going all the way up to the top. And I will say that, there aren't a lot of members of Congress again, that are willing to, push forward in this effort. But Representative Burleson, Representative Burchett, even Representative Crane have been very helpful in all of this. And so that is what we're trying to do. The executive branch specifically actually did give permission to Eric Burleson to set up a codel to Area 51. Now, do I think Area 51 is housing anything currently? No. But I will say that we have heard testimony from pilots that have stated and that they've seen weird things happening over there. And so what's been interesting about all this as well is that there do seem to be these hot spots and reporting that we've come across in which these things tend to pop in and out of. And so for us, from a congressional perspective, I'm not saying that these things are little green men, but what I am saying is it's definitely something that we need to look into and to take seriously. And I'm not the only one that thinks that either. I'm just the only one that's going public about it.
Yeah, we know that there are many people in Congress that take this seriously, but are saying a lot less publicly than one would expect, given the gravity of the issue. What do you want to see happen, let's say, over the next 5 years on the issue? I mean, there are calls for full disclosure. There are calls for a more gradual, incremental process. There's a need for further legislation. There's a need for Congress to understand this is something for it to govern. I mean, what's your ideal scenario over 5 years on this?
My ideal scenario would be to house a website where all the information that we're being shown or information that comes in, whether it's on military equipment that can be declassified, can be housed for the American people to go to and find. This whole idea, oh, well, information might be out there publicly. Well, where do people go to find it? They make it so difficult to find. And then also too, going back to what I found to be a really interesting disinformation campaign that I'm watching take place in real time. I think that these former heads, former directors of these agencies that have been known to lie to Congress and put out false information, blockade investigations, those people should be held criminally accountable. But that would be up to the Department of Justice. And so I think getting something on the books, again, the UAP Disclosure Act, something with teeth that can actually help push this forward would be huge. And we do have a really small window of opportunity for this specifically because now our Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, has been one of the biggest voices in this. And a lot of people forget that. And so, I think that I'm proud to say that I'm in the same perspective and mindset as Secretary Rubio on this topic. And so we're going to be continuing to push on our end. But I think that you will find a lot of our investigations to be interesting. So don't pay attention to the naysayers. It's a very small group of weirdos anyways that are saying anything about it. So we'll deliver.
Okay. Well, we know you only have a couple minutes left. So I want to ask you one last question on this, which is a very simple one, but it's a big one. If you have to say briefly why this is important to your constituents, to the American citizenry, and also to the world. I mean, why is this important? Why do you work on it? Why have you devoted part of your political career and expended political capital on this?
Well, there is, first and foremost, speaking directly to my constituents, there's actually a large number of sightings in our area specifically. And so people in my community have reported it. People in my community have experienced it. So I've been on a number of occasions reached out to by directly my constituents on the topic. But then in addition to that, there is this aspect of, what is this tech? Is this our tech? Is this, extraterrestrial intelligence tech? Is this interdimensional? What is this specifically? And can we figure it out? Because I think the whole idea of gaslighting people into, saying that that's not what you think it is, when in actuality, many people are seeing and saying, I don't know, this doesn't really look right. But then also too, we have to understand that, in the event, as Dr. Avi Loeb is putting forward, that there is life, is it not our obligation to try to at least inform the public on that? I mean, do we really think that we are the only life form in the galaxies? I doubt it. And so this, I think, can get into a very different and deep topic. And I think I went there recently with Joe Rogan, but, I'm not afraid to have the conversations. I just think that to discredit it and to poo-poo it is the easiest solution. But the most difficult thing is to ask questions and to investigate and find answers.
Yeah, and I should add to that within the scientific community, there is willingness to invest billions of dollars in the search for microbes. Mm-hmm. And frankly, I find microbes much more boring than intelligent beings. If you look down the street and you say, okay, the houses on my street have microbes in them, it's very challenging to see them at a distance. However, if there is a resident that may visit your front door or that threw a tennis ball to your backyard or has some construction in their backyard, we might be able to see it more easily. So the fact that microbes are more prevalent doesn't mean that we need to invest all federal funds on the search for microbes. That's completely acceptable within the narrative of the mainstream within science. I find that really strange, given that the public cares so much about intelligence out there. Another way to say it is we really need to find intelligence out there because it's not very common in academia.
That's good, Avi. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, thank you very much, Congresswoman. We really appreciate your time.
Perfect. We'll be in touch soon.
Our upcoming symposium in Italy is taking place in late October. Registration is still open for that. And you can simply go to thesoulfoundation.org to register. We have many speakers. People are going to want to engage in person. My co-founder, Gary Nolan, Admiral Tim Gallaudet, retired Colonel Carl Nell, a number of scientists from Europe. So please register and join us. And also, if you want to support public education of this kind, public communication of this kind, and also research on UAP, consider joining as a member of the Soul Foundation. That can also be done on our website, thesoulfoundation.org. So, with that, we can take a quick break, and we'll be back in a moment. Welcome back to the Soul Forum, the Soul Foundation's monthly digital meeting space for discussion of the science, politics, culture, and philosophy of UAP. So, Avi, thanks for doing the dual interview with Representative Luna. We know it's not easy to interview with another person, but we think we had a good conversation there. Now, before we get into your recent research, I want to talk to you about what's going on in Congress. You and I have had a lot of discussions about testimony about U.S. government UAP secrecy. And, in the time that I've known you, I've seen you become more open on the subject, even though you're very circumspect. Where are you right now about some of these specific claims and allegations?
Yeah, I'm sort of torn between two narratives that I hear. When I was briefing Congress, in fact, meeting with Congresswoman Luna back on May 1st. The day before that, I visited the AARO, the All Domain Anomaly Resolution Office. They invited me, and I asked them, frankly, I said, did you see anything unusual by studying the reports of the past? And they said, no, not really. And then I asked, are you sure that you have access to all information within government, including highly classified information? And they said, yes, definitely. And a day later, in Congress, I heard the other views. So to me, it's just a question of direct evidence. Okay. And if the government has materials or information that indicates technological artifacts that are not human made, I would love to see those and help government figure them out. And because scientifically speaking, it will change everything. It will imply that there might be a smarter kid on our cosmic block, which would not be surprising. If you read the news every day, there is a lot of room for improvement. We definitely are not the pinnacle of intelligence. But moreover, it will change our perspective about what we want to do. I hope it will bring humanity to a cooperative mode, because as of now, we invest most of our resources, $2.4 trillion a year in conflicts, military budgets. And perhaps once we realize that we are all in the same boat, because we have a neighbor, okay, so we are all part of the same family, then perhaps we will work together. And if we use just a fraction of that budget to space exploration, I think within this century, we can establish a space platform on which humans can travel long distance. And that's, in my view, is a much more uplifting vision than going to Mars. Going to Mars, it's just another rock, which is actually much worse than the rock we are on, because it doesn't have an atmosphere. It's a desert. The conditions change by hundreds of degrees between day and night. You are exposed to cosmic rays that can damage your body within a few years. You might be dead. So why would we go to another rock? Why not build our own space platform that can support life as we know it, and much better so? We went all the way from the jungles of Africa to high rises in cities. That was a huge transition, and going to space is a more minor transition. If we start in high rises in cities and just build the same habitat out there. So in my view, this is a very important transformation, and it's the next step of humanity. People talk a lot about AI, artificial intelligence, but really doesn't touch the important facets of our existence. And the question is, what is the meaning of our existence? What do we want to accomplish? And obviously, we want to maintain the longevity of humanity. And there would be a lot of catastrophes in the future of the Earth. We know that because it happened in the past. And if we want to preserve humanity, we might put people on a space platform, and one way to get inspired to do that is if we see our neighbors doing that, and so I think we should be open to the possibility that we can learn something. We need a sense of humility, modesty that is missing And one way to receive that sense is to realize that there is superhuman intelligence out there. There is something better than us, and it could give us inspiration. It could serve as a role model for us. So I see it as a huge impact on the way we think, on science in particular, because it can reveal science and technology that we don't possess, because we just had 100 years since quantum mechanics was discovered. I was actually at the Niels Bohr Institute just last week, visiting at a conference, and I remember the photograph from 1930 of an auditorium there at a conference that was held at the Niels Bohr Institute, and Niels Bohr was sitting next to Werner Heisenberg, Wolfgang Pauli, and Lev Landau. And I entered the same auditorium. It looked familiar, and I sat on the wooden bench, and someone told me, "Oh, you are just sitting exactly at the seat where Wolfgang Pauli sat 95 years ago." And all I could think at that time was, this wooden bench is not very comfortable. They didn't have a quality of life that we have today. But I would trade everything to go back in time, 95 years, to the same auditorium, because the spirit of physicists back then was exploratory. They were open to changing their perception of reality. When quantum mechanics was discovered, they were open-minded. They went against dogmatic thinking. And we very much need that in academia now. And I really enjoyed the conference that I attended last week, because it was open-minded. And I spoke about 3I Atlas, and there was a Nobel laureate, David Gross, that asked me a lot of questions. That's the way science should be done. We should be curious about anomalies, because they may represent something beyond our current knowledge.
Avi, you're incredible at rhetoric, because I think you put about 7 things on the table in 3 minutes that I can follow up on, while making it seem like you were just talking about one thing. I want to unpack some of this and take out some threads and follow them. It almost sounds like a cliche to say that dogmatism, closed-mindedness, a lack of curiosity are common in academia today. But I do think that's true. And what surprises me, not only about the UAP topic, but some of the things taking place with the search for technosignatures and biosignatures, is that the latter two things shouldn't be controversial at all scientifically, as basic hypotheses or premises that those things could be detectable and out there. And yet we know it's been a fight over the last 10 years for people like yourself to do study in that direction at all. Yeah. So I want to tie that thought to again what I was asking about a moment ago, which is the allegations about UAP secrecy and UAP knowledge in the U.S. government. I mean, let's say that there indeed is something like, let's just speak hypothetically instead of talking about the testimony, just a component of something from an interstellar craft. A 2 foot by 2 foot box or something with, but unknown. By the way,
I can immediately verify that it's interstellar. That's straightforward, because the same technique that we apply to the materials that we retrieved in the Pacific Ocean of an interstellar meteor, potentially, with the same approach can be taken here. We can, if we just have a gram of material, not much, we can immediately tell the abundance of isotopes, the chemical composition, and we can demonstrate, if this material came from outside the solar system, that it was not part of the solar system. That's straightforward. It would take me only a few months to figure this out. And then once we realize the material that makes such an object is from outside the solar system, then we can ask what does the object mean, and what kind of technology it carried.
Well, if I may, let me follow up on that. I mean, let's say that suddenly we had some acknowledgement about this from the U.S. government. What would you do as a prominent scientist with a Harvard position, able to marshal the best scientific resources, capital? You have ties to government. what would your proposal be for the plan of attack coming from academia with private sector support and engagement with government?
Yes, indeed. All my research over the past decade was supported by the private sector. I did not apply for government funds to do my innovative research for a variety of reasons, because the funding agencies are using committees that are populated by mainstream scientists who are resisting innovative research. They live in their echo chamber. But at the same time, I had a lot of wealthy individuals show up at my home and provide me with the necessary funds. And I think there is a lot of wealth. The situation is quite different than it was a century ago or 75 years ago when the National Science Foundation was established, because now there is a layer of society that has enormous wealth. And of course, we hear a lot about their investments in artificial intelligence, but they're also very curious about extraterrestrial intelligence. So if we had access to materials or information that is related to that, I think I can easily raise all the money necessary to examine that in full detail. I have those connections. And so what needs to be done is scientific analysis of the information, the data, the materials that could give us very clear evidence as to the purpose of this thing. What does it entail? It would be inappropriate to share, this information or materials with corporations that are making money, basically, rather than with scientists like myself that are trying to figure it out. Money is not the issue for me. I wrote about 3i Atlas more than 50 essays over the past 2 months since it was discovered, and they're all offered for free. I mean, really, for me, it's just trying to figure out nature. That's what motivates me. And I was asked last night if we do find the extraterrestrial intelligence and the Nobel Committee in Stockholm calls me in the morning, what would I do? And I said I will just respond the same way that Bob Dylan did. I will ignore it, because the finding itself of extraterrestrial intelligence is far more valuable than any prize awarded by a human to a human. And it's really, if I have limited time on this earth, I would rather dedicate it to figuring out extraterrestrial intelligence if I find it. So altogether, it's, my priority is figuring out nature. And that's what can be done by collecting evidence and studying it. And what you find right now within academia is resistant to that. And that is a self-fulfilling prophecy, in the sense that if you are not analyzing data, seeking the evidence, you will never be able to figure out something beyond your current knowledge. And so when people say, this is extraordinary claim that requires extraordinary evidence, what they're actually saying is they're not willing to put time and resources to study it. And that means that they will remain ignorant. So humans have this talent of staying ignorant by believing stories that they tell each other. Nowadays, it's on social media. So they tell each other stories within echo chambers, within their tribe. And they don't seek evidence that might prove them wrong. But that's not the way science should be done. And the only opportunity that we have to learn something new is when there are anomalies, something that doesn't quite line up with what we expected. And I hope, the government has the advantage that it monitors the sky for national security purposes. It monitors the ground as well, and the oceans, and they may have data that scientists do not have because of that. They have huge amount of resources, instruments and funding, almost $1 trillion in the defense budget for 2026. That's a lot of money compared to what science gets. So there is a reasonable chance that they may have seen things that scientists never witnessed, and they should not hold them away from scientists if they do have them. And I hope they will share them with people like me.
Okay, amazing. So I want to come back to the 3i Atlas object, and I want to ask you, look, if NASA were to greenlight a mission to send a probe to study the object, what are the measurements or data that you would need returned in order to determine whether the object is natural or potentially artificial?
So on October 3rd, 3i Atlas will pass within 29 million kilometers from Mars. And we have several orbiters around Mars. One of them is the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter that NASA launched, and it has a camera with a 0.5 meter diameter that can resolve 3i Atlas with a 30 kilometer per pixel. And that would help us a lot, because currently the estimate for the maximum size of the nucleus is somewhere between 20 and 46 kilometers. The 46 kilometers was obtained based on the reflectance of sunlight, solar radiation, at 1 micrometer wavelength. And such a big object would actually be almost resolved by the high-rise camera. So I would like to know whether the object is of that size or maybe much smaller and surrounded by a cloud of dust, in which case it would be less exotic. But if it is of the order of tens of kilometers in diameter, then it's just completely anomalous, because it's 1 million times more massive than the previous two interstellar objects, Oumuamua and Borisov. And there is not enough rocky material in interstellar space per unit volume to deliver such a giant rock to the neighborhood of Earth within the last decade. So I would find it extremely anomalous if it ends up being that big. And the high-rise could tell us. There are also some instruments that the European Space Agency can use, the Chinese can use near Mars. And then on March 16th, 2026, 3i Atlas is supposed to pass relatively close to, within 50 million kilometers from Jupiter. And then I propose to use the Juno spacecraft there to come close to it. And Congresswoman Luna supported that in a letter to the administrator of NASA, the interim administrator, the Secretary of Transportation, Sean Duffy. And she encouraged NASA to use all resources to probe 3i Atlas, and I very much am grateful for her visionary letter. So my hope is that in the coming month, we will learn much more. As 3i Atlas gets closer to the sun, it will be illuminated, it will get brighter, since it will reflect more sunlight. At the same time, if it's a comet, it will probably erupt and generate a lot of dust and gas that will tell us that it's a comet. But if it doesn't do so, and for example, if it maneuvers on October 29th, when it comes closest to the sun, that's the perfect timing for a maneuver, the way that our spacecraft do when they come close to the sun. Then I think the stock market may crash. I already received the text message from a fan that, and by the way, my essays on medium.com, you can find them by looking for Avi Loeb at medium.com. I put one every day or a few days. My essays were read by more than 1 million people over the past month, which is quite remarkable. It's there is a huge audience for this subject. And one of the readers wrote to me a text message saying that he is trading options on the volatility of the stock market with an expiration date of October 29th. I also received an email from a former pilot in the USA Air Force who told me, he basically said that in the title of his message, he said, "Because of you!" exclamation mark. And what he meant to say is that because of me, his daughter is now interested in becoming a scientist, and she keeps talking about aliens. And that's, to me, the biggest compliment. If I can encourage young kids to become scientists and to study the possibility of extraterrestrial intelligence, I would feel very satisfied with what I'm doing. And then finally, yesterday I got a message from a car racer in NASCAR who says, "I want to put your image and the image of 3i Atlas on the hood of my car because you are now a hot commodity among NASCAR car racers." I've never watched NASCAR, but
well, Avi, in that case, you don't have to, worry about, receiving or not receiving a Nobel Prize if your image will be in a NASCAR race for your work. I think probably no other scientist could claim that honor. So, you just said something which I find very interesting, is that you would be, very happy, very satisfied to know that you inspired kids today to become scientists, driven or motivated by the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. And that leads me to something I want to talk to you about, which is that, as a humanities and social science person who, doesn't understand science with the fineness that a scientist does, I often look at you and scientists looking for traits that I understand better, both in your work and your person. And one thing I see with you is you have an abundance of imagination. I mean, imagination in the rigorous sense, intellectual imagination about what science should be. And I think that one of the problems with academia and the sciences today is that we have the wrong kind of imagination. We have old imagination. As you said, quantum physics is now 100 years old, and no one should be, or the discovery of it is.
And we still don't understand it, by the way. We still don't have the correct interpretation. So nobody ordered quantum mechanics, and Einstein had an issue with that. And we just need to understand that nature is more imaginative than we are. And, what aliens may look like, or what extraterrestrial technologies may look like, could far exceed what we see in scripts of Hollywood producers or directors. Our imagination is limited by what we witnessed here on Earth. And meeting another, a visitor from another star is like a blind date of interstellar proportions. And my advice to young people that go on blind dates is observe the other side before you speak. Don't assume that you know the other side in advance. Don't brag. We sent out the golden record that, is a very proud statement about the music of the 60s and the kind of things that we feel that humanity should be proud of. That's really very arrogant of us, because even now I don't find the music from the 60s as very appealing. I would argue that we should be more modest, just look out and learn from what we see, rather than try to tell the universe that we are at the center of it, or that we are the smartest that ever existed. It's very unlikely. When Elon Musk said that, we are probably alone, that's why we should go to Mars. I would argue that it's very unlikely that Elon Musk was the most accomplished space entrepreneur since the Big Bang, 13.8 billion years ago. That there must be a lot of more successful space explorers that existed billions of years ago, simply for a very simple reason, that there are billions of Earth-Sun analogs in the Milky Way galaxy alone. And, there must have been things like us in some of those, and they existed billions of years ago. So just like most humans, more than 1 billion people lived on this earth, 100 billion people lived on this earth, and just 8 billion are living right now. Most of them are dead. The answer to Fermi's question in that case is, where is everybody? Well, most of them are dead. Most of the people that ever lived on Earth are dead. It's quite possible that most of the civilizations that ever existed are dead by now, because they existed billions of years ago. Now, when the SETI community is searching for radio signals, it's just like it says, let's check who is alive right now that we can receive messages from. But suppose that there is only a small minority of those civilizations that are still alive, and but nevertheless, those that existed billions of years ago sent functioning devices, probes to other places, self-replicating probes maybe. We might find their packages, the things that they sent in the mail, rather than them themselves sending us or giving us a call on the phone, that. And so that for the SETI community to just insist, let's wait for a phone call, it's completely inappropriate, because we should also search for packages in our mailbox. And because the civilizations that sent them may not be around anymore, because their star evolved, they went through some catastrophe. But if they send functioning devices or self-replicating devices, they will be around and we can find them. And it's a completely different approach. It has nothing to do with the Drake equation. Just a month ago, I suggested the new scale that is now called the Loeb scale, where we look at interstellar objects and decide, if it's a natural object, for sure, we call it, we give it a rank of 0. And if it's definitely technological, that may be a threat to Earth, we give it a rank of 10. And currently I give 3i Atlas a rank of 4. But my point is that, we should judge by the evidence. And this scale, 0 to 10, has nothing to do with the Drake equation, because you can imagine a situation, a scenario where all radio transmitting civilizations are dead, or they stop transmitting radio waves. One of the two. You will see no radio signal. The SETI community will continue to watch the sky for centuries and not find anything. But at the same time, if those civilizations that existed a long time ago, or the ones that are not transmitting radio waves, are sending equipment, and some of these packages are arriving to our mailbox, are near us, like in the form of UAP, then we might find them. But the SETI community will still not find any radio signals from the sky. So there is a scenario where the Drake equation has nothing to do with our discovery rate of physical objects that are in the vicinity of Earth.
Avi, there's so much to follow up on here, but I want to ask you a question about the current of astronomy that goes back centuries, that is actually resolutely against not only geocentrism, but anthropocentrism. And I hear that in what you're saying. You're echoing, of course, Copernicus, and I think many generations of astronomers who have been extremely suspicious, again, not only of the old geocentrism, which we got over, but of anthropocentrism. And something you said, some minutes ago that I found striking was, you clearly don't think that we in the present today and those of us in the most prosperous countries are the pinnacle of humanity. Far from it. So what is it about astronomy that is a discipline that might uniquely make you a proponent of this view?
Oh, it's a sense of cosmic modesty. I think it's arrogant of us to imagine that we are the most important outcome of the universe. And I was actually visited by a group of scholars from Christianity Today, an organization, a religious organization, and they asked me what would the discovery of extraterrestrial mean for their faith, for their religious belief. And I said, look, I have 2 daughters. And when the second one was born, it didn't take away any of the love that I have to the first one. So imagining that God is a parent that can attend only to one child is very limiting. And we might have siblings out there, and it shouldn't affect your religious beliefs. You might get jealous that some of the siblings are more accomplished than you are. That happens within families, but it should not take away anything from your faith. And they accepted that. And, the idea that we are all powerful, that goes back to Friedrich Nietzsche saying God is dead. And he had a vision of a superhuman, someone that, will be the human of the future. And I see superhumans as they may have existed for billions of years before us around other stars, because most stars formed billions of years before the sun. I just wanted to also mention that with respect to UAP, I'm leading the Galileo project, as you mentioned, and we now have 3 observatories, one in Massachusetts, another one in Pennsylvania, and a third one in Nevada. And this coming month, we'll start using multiple units to get triangulation and distances to objects in the sky that might be anomalous. I asked the research team to monitor the sky after October, when 3i Atlas comes close to the sun, just to check whether there is any additional activity in the atmosphere of the Earth as a result of it releasing maybe mini probes. But we will get data on a few million objects in the coming year, and the most anomalous among them will have distances, velocities, accelerations. And I want to figure, I'm really not interested in human-made gadgets, that to me they are boring. I want to see if there is anything operating beyond the performance envelope of human-made technology, and that is, in resonance with what Congresswoman Luna was referring to, and it's quite possible the U.S. government has such data, but I haven't seen it.
Yeah, and this is an important point, because one of the difficulties of the alliance between scientists and retired government officials on the UAP topic is scientists need to see the data. And what you operate with is quantifiable data, observational data, et cetera, not with testimony, and certainly not with historical records. I mean, that's the sort of thing cultural anthropologists like me can consider data, but scientists can't. And so that's created, I think, a lot of...
Yeah, in this context, I just wanted to clarify that, when I was a child, I was very much struck by the following dynamics during dinner conversations. I would ask a difficult question, and the adults in the room would come up with a story. And I was very often disappointed, because it seemed to me like the story doesn't make sense. And as a kid, I really wanted to figure it out myself. I didn't want to believe to the adults in the room that pretend to know more than they actually know. And, the privilege of being a scientist is exactly that. Which is, let's collect evidence and figure out whether the adults in the room were telling us the truth. And that is exactly also the motivation of Congresswoman Luna, in Washington, D.C. And we just want to figure out what is out there. And there is this tendency of people to hide some of the truth for a variety of reasons. I will not get into that. That's more a subject for them to discuss with their therapists. For me as a scientist, if we have a neighbor, a cosmic neighbor, and we keep insisting in the conversations over dinner, we keep insisting that we have no neighbors, that will not remove the neighbor. It will just maintain our ignorance. Just for the same reason that when the Vatican insisted that the Earth is at the center of the universe, and it didn't change the trajectory of the Earth around the sun. The Earth was orbiting the sun for 4.6 billion years before the Vatican even existed. So the Earth doesn't care about what the Vatican says. And for the same reason, if we have neighbors, they don't care about what, how the government hides data, or how some people in academia do not want to look at anomalies. I was actually invited by the Polish government a couple of years ago to give a talk in celebration of the birthday of Nicolaus Copernicus. And I gave a talk about the next Copernican revolution, which is us recognizing that we are not the smartest kid on the block, that we are not at the intellectual center of the universe.
Well said, Avi. And I would follow up by saying that we have a little too much protest about the possibility of a cosmic neighbor. It absolutely, we have nothing to say that it's impossible. We see increasing evidence of the probability of it, and yet we have only a handful of natural scientists like yourself who are interested in investigating that and attempting to verify.
But think also of the alternative. Suppose someone says, I'm down to earth. I don't believe anything is coming from elsewhere. Okay, so what are you saying? You're saying basically that the Director of National Intelligence delivered 3 reports to the US Congress in which the director said that we were unable to identify the nature of objects in the sky. What was the message then? That the intelligence agencies are not doing their job? I mean, can you imagine that they admit that they're not doing their job? Because if it's not from outside of this earth, it must be some adversarial nation, right? They know what the US is doing. And so they are basically admitting that adversarial nations are operating in the sky of the United States and they cannot figure out what they are doing. That's specifically what they're saying. If you argue that the UAP has nothing to do with extra, so that's a very serious matter. Why isn't that by itself convincing people to pay a lot of attention to it? So in both cases, whether it's human-made or extraterrestrial, I think it carries heavy consequences, and we need to take it seriously.
Well, I think that's a really good place to end because I know you need to go. Just so the audience understands, you've pointed out the obvious about the statements and reports coming from 3 different directors of national intelligence now about the UAP topic, and you've pointed that out as a scientist who wants hard data, but you're saying, look, this is testimony to something, and we need to absolutely pay attention to it.
Exactly, and we need to figure it out, and it requires scientists, it requires funding. So let's just look out and figure it out. If the government has some data that they want to figure out, I'll be happy to help them. Altogether, I think it would make the coming decade exciting. And science is fun. It's not a burden. It's not a facade where you need to maintain some public image and basically tell the public, don't even think about this or that. That's not what science is about. Science is about, okay, well, any question is allowed. Any conjecture is allowed. But then let's use hard evidence to figure out the answer, which is the approach of the Soccer World Organization, FIFA. When there is a controversial goal, they don't go around and ask, the players, the goalkeeper or the audience, what do you think was out there? It's not a matter of opinion. They just go to the cameras and look at the video, and that's what I'm doing in the context of the Galileo project.
Okay, well, thank you. We can continue if you want to, but I believe you have to go, so I will.
I have a few more minutes. If you want one last question, I'll be glad to.
Well, I'll ask a last question then, which concerns the philosophical dimension of your scientific thinking. I've heard you both in this interview, in public talks, private conversations, other interviews, engage in, not unrigorous conjecture, but serious speculation about, what a non-human intelligence or extraterrestrial intelligence might be like. And I've heard you talk about everything from something biological to something that would be difficult to fathom, even to something, once I heard you say a few years ago that could simulate a universe, even, so that we might think that the only other kind of intelligence is something strange, but still a little bit commensurate with us. And you said, well, it may be something that actually is so beyond our imagination that we really have to stretch to start to think about the possibilities. So say a word about the models you work with. You can't investigate them exactly, but you still have them driving your imagination when you do research.
Yeah. So we have to keep in mind that the size of the human brain was maximized to amount to 20% of the metabolic power of the human body. Our brains could not have become bigger. They consume 20% of the power of the human body. And that's what limits our cognitive abilities. We think that we are very smart. We eat other animals that we believe are dumber than us, if you just look at the menu of any restaurant. And the point is that you can imagine that on another planet, around another star, maybe the brain size was larger because of different circumstances. And that would mean that we are unable to fully understand how intelligent they are. For them, we are just like ants on the pavement. We are doing our thing. We are engaging in conflicts. We're building our castles, like what we think are amazing creations. We send a golden record of music, but and of images of what represents us. But in fact, all of this is complete nonsense compared to what a higher level of intelligence would contemplate. And that's quite possible. Now, of course, there is also artificial intelligence. We are creating a form of intelligence that may supersede our cognitive abilities simply because it will have more parameters in the neural network that we create. And then it will give us also a sense of modesty, because it's like giving birth to a child that is much smarter than you are. And so, one way or another, either with artificial intelligence, our own creation, or with alien intelligence. And by the way, both of them are AI, abbreviated as AI. In both cases, we might realize that, there is something beyond us. Now, you may say, how do we recognize something beyond us? Well, first of all, we will see that it's not familiar. It's different. Secondly, we would see that it accommodates to what we are when it communicates with us, but then we think that it's doing one thing, but it actually is doing something bigger and better, or beyond what we thought it's doing. So if we communicate with it, we might realize that, we are not the smartest, that it's sort of like an oracle that can tell you things that you are unable to forecast, which may represent a higher level of science, may represent a higher level of intelligence. So I see that as an opportunity for us to grow, to learn, to be modest. The traditional way of being modest was that of religions. They told us there is a God and it's superhuman. I'm saying it could also boil down to, even for secular people, boil down to recognizing that there is an entity out there that is smarter than us, and we better be modest and learn from it. It's just like having a smarter kid in your class. You can complain about it, you can ignore that, which is what most kids do. But if you are smart enough, you will learn from that kid and try to be better.
Yes, well said. And we appreciate the call for intellectual and scientific modesty, both in the face of anomalous data, but also in the face of testimony going to Congress about things that we couldn't imagine being said there even 5 years ago. So Thank you, Avi, for being with us. Thank you, as always, for your insights. And thank you for your recent research. We look forward to hearing more about 3i Atlas and your other projects, the observatories, and the Galileo project generally. So thanks a lot for being with us.
Thanks for having me, and I look forward to revelations in the coming years.
Thank you. We are having our symposium in Italy at the end of October. If you're interested in joining us to see many of our advisory board members and scientists we work with speak in public, just go to thesoulfoundation.org to register. We would also ask that you consider membership. That's a way to support our work. And if there are people out there that are considering larger financial support for UAP-related research, we have a number of projects that could use your support, from my co-founder Gary Nolan's material science work on alleged UAP materials, to my own ethnographic research with witnesses to UAP and so-called experiencers, to our director of technology, Jonathan Berte's AI-driven research on the history of U.S. government secrecy on UAP, and also to a new epidemiological project that we're undertaking that would concern the decision-making of Americans with different religious and ethnic backgrounds in the face of a disclosure event from the United States government. So if you are interested in supporting us, drop us a line at the following email address, gifts@thesoulfoundation.org. Again, that is gifts@thesoulfoundation.org. And again, consider membership with us and attending our symposium. Thank you very much.